Thanks, Liz. Hi, everybody. I'm Wanda Wilson, the Executive Director of Oakland Planning and Development. I'm also somebody who's had probably 20 plus years working on code enforcement in Oakland. So quite a bit of institutional knowledge here, but I'm happy to see everybody here and welcome everyone to the Oakwatch meeting for tonight. We're happy to have you all here. And we're gonna start by reading the mission statement for Oakwatch, and then we'll get into the discussion of issues that we have in our topic for the evening. So the Oakwatch, the Oakland Code Enforcement Project, works to improve the quality of life in Oakland by bringing people and institutions together to identify code violations, advocate for remediation, and monitor the outcomes. And before we get into the discussion, I think because we have several new people here with us, that it might be helpful just to give sort of a little kind of history and overview of how we try to operate to address code enforcement issues, which also includes what we were talking about before with trash, and then also student conduct is that's part of public safety is part of the city code. So that's why it's part of what we do with Oakwatch, which is focused on, working with our enforcement partners to address concerns that we have as a community, help prioritize the items that we want to, really make sure are the focus, and use data and tracking as a way to really monitor the outcomes. That monitor the outcomes part of the mission statement is really an important part of what Oakwatch does. So we do utilize a lot of data gathering and reports and use all of that information to show, are we addressing the things that we're hearing from residents as concerns, and our enforcement partners applying their their powers to address those priorities and making a difference in addressing them. So we do track, we do gather a lot of information. And we've moved to a quarterly meeting, but are still doing a lot of the Oakwatch work all the time. So my team is out there in the neighborhood all the time, and we're tracking 311 reports, which is a very helpful resource for us to track what complaints are coming from neighbors. And then we also look to our enforcement partners to provide information to us, which we're in touch with you all of our enforcement partners on a regular basis, get that input in terms of data back, in terms of how many citations are written, what is the citation process for different things. We go to housing court for the things that are the more on the PLI side of things, the building code violations. And we look at police blotters and the reports from our public safety partners at Zone 4 and Pitt Police to see how are things kind of matching up with, the things in their reports and what we know is happening in the neighborhood. And Oakwatch has a long, successful history, really starting from the Oakland 2025 Master Plan, which was released 10 years ago, and Oakwatch is a great successful effort of residents like yourselves being involved in what's going on in the neighborhood, and has really been able to have a big impact. So even though we're at quarterly meetings, we're still very focused on code enforcement and want to hear from neighbors and track information. We can put all kinds of stuff on our website and send emails. And so we can do a lot in between the meetings to be able to track where we are. So we're hearing a lot from neighbors, and this is very common this time of year, that there's so much disruptive behavior happening in terms of off-campus parties where there's a lot of noise, unsafe conditions in terms of so many people in very small buildings, from sort of, fire safety, also a lot of underage drinking and binge drinking, and just a lot of disruptive behavior that's a disruption in terms of noise and keeping the peace. So we've been hearing that from folks, and that's the topic for tonight. We want to focus on giving our partners at Zone 4 an opportunity to address that, and also Pitt Police. So did Commander Griffin join us? Help me out there, Liz.
You know what? I'm not seeing him, which okay. I had spoken, been emailing back and forth with him over the last couple of days.
Do we have another officer from the zone?
Wanda, John Tokarski here.
Hi, John. How are you?
Good. I don't see anybody here. I just emailed all 3 community officers and the commander to let them know about the meeting that's in progress. So I sent them the link. Hopefully they'll be joining us shortly.
Okay. Yeah, we would love to touch base. With and have an opportunity for them to talk about their approach. Often over the years, we've really been able to discuss at Oakwatch the opportunity for, particular impact events that they do, and, would love to have the opportunity to hear from them about particular ways they're addressing some of these public safety concerns. And I would say the other, just to kind of lay, again, groundwork and focus on, the work of Oakwatch specifically related to public disruptions and underage drinking and large disruptive parties is that, we're concerned about it because it's directly related to student safety, resident safety, and just overall safety in the neighborhood overall. If we don't have adequate enforcement of, the Pitt Student Code of Conduct and our laws that are in place with the City of Pittsburgh Code, when we have a lot of illegal activity going on that goes, without enforcement, without any consequences, it ends up becoming an attractive nuisance for other illegal activity to take place in our community. That endangers everyone. That endangers the students who live in our community. It endangers our long-term residents. It endangers other people who are the ones who are coming into our community because of that attraction. So you end up with, high school students from the suburbs coming in because they know they can get alcohol or drugs without any consequences. And you end up really having a lot of issues around other public safety concerns. So we have a lot of history with addressing these challenges, and just setting the stage for, that we're looking for citations to be written for students without warnings, parties to be broken up, and tracking mechanisms for us to understand the impact with student conduct and the consequences that we're seeing, and really looking at a data stream. So that's one of the things that we want to talk about tonight, is what's that data stream to get the reporting back to us about, like, this was a specific incident that happened at this specific time in this specific place. And here's where you can see that on the blotter. Here's where you can see the citations. Here's how Pitt Police and Zone 4 Police are working together on this particular issue. This is how it might even be going to the Disruptive Properties Ordinance, those kinds of things. So we can really track, and we can see here's what happened in terms of student conduct citations and how that's being addressed. So just an overview of kind of our history of how we've been successful in the community over the years to really uphold public safety, the tools we have in place in working cooperatively with our public safety officials, and the success we've had with that, just as an overview for anybody who might be new. So if we don't have anybody still yet from the zone, but correct me when that happens. But John Tokarski is here with the City of Pittsburgh and the Public Safety Department. So John, thanks for joining us. And we have Lieutenant Kiefer from the Pitt Police, and we have Associate Director Landy from the Student Conduct Office at Pitt.
Hey, Wanda, if I could, sorry. Matt now serves as the director of student conduct, so I just wanted to have that.
Sorry. Okay, great.
Record, but just...
All right. Well, you're even more accountable.
Congratulations.
So you can give us even more information about how. So that's great. So I think then really the frame for tonight is for residents of Oakland to be able to articulate particular concerns, things that they're observing, things that they see going on in the neighborhood, and then an opportunity for us to understand specifically, the amount of citations that are being written, where we see those on blotters, and where we're seeing that to both the magistrate court and the student conduct process. I was going to start with Zone 4 in terms of giving us sort of their overview. That was going to be my plan.
Lieutenant Kiefer, maybe?
Yeah, so until they are able to join us, Lieutenant Kiefer, if you can give us an overview of your work over the past several weeks. There's definitely been a lot of disruptive behavior, a lot of underage drinking, a lot of dangerous events in terms of size and scale.
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Lieutenant Kiefer. I'm with the University of Pittsburgh Police. I'm currently the Community Programs Unit Supervisor. Formerly, I guess probably the last Oakwatch meeting, it would have been Sergeant Riley, who's since been promoted to Lieutenant Riley. So since I came into the unit, I've had Officer Clello is also on this call. He's part of the Community Programs Unit as well. Once we receive reports of repeated offenses, we'll generate a knock and talk list, which I believe has been pretty successful so far this semester. On top of that, we have agreements with student affairs and community engagement, if I meant to say, weekly check-ins, and any repeat houses or residences that police have been responding to, we'll share fact sharing session, and we'll see if any of those houses come up on that radar, and then try to nip it in the bud from there.
What do you mean specifically by nip it in the bud? Do you write citations when those disruptive events are happening?
Well, that's a great question. So in order for Pitt Police to write a citation, A, we have to have probable cause to do that, and B, we have to be in our jurisdiction to do that. So a lot of times residents will call when it's maybe a little bit outside of our jurisdiction. We'll still respond if they believe it's Pitt students and other is in that area. But there is going to be cases where citations aren't written. And those are two of the factors. Some other factors where a citation wouldn't be written is an emergency situation where like medical amnesty may apply. And that's not even.
So let's dig specifically into, I mean, most of the issues that we're dealing with in the Oakland community are definitely within the Pitt Police jurisdiction in terms of the distance from campus property. So that's the majority. So let's talk about those, and let's talk about the probable cause item that you mentioned. If you are at an instance, of a property where somebody has in fact called in a concern about, illegal, over, too many people, too much noise, and underage drinking, that would be probable cause. That's against the law. So what are you doing at that point when in fact probable cause is in fact in place?
Okay, so in a lot of cases, I can tell you there's no complaint on the call. So therefore we no longer have a victim. So if the officer arrives and they cannot establish their own probable cause, there's no noise ordinance violation observed because they maybe seen the police officer, the call effectively ends, unless the officer is at that point able to establish their own probable cause to start their own investigation and maybe go knock on that door. I can't stress enough when a complainant calls in, if they can be seen, whether it's at another location because they're fear of retaliation from the neighbor, because when we have a complaint that wants to be seen, then we have a victim, the crime can be investigated more thoroughly because now we have a victim to work with, and they're the ones that are standing by saying this violation has occurred. And more times than not, and I came from the night shift from the last 5 to 6 years, so I can tell you for a fact, a lot of times complainants don't want to be seen. And the reality is, if we could see them in person, and like I said, it doesn't have to be in their resident right next door, it could be down the street, we could more thoroughly investigate it. If whenever the police arrives and there's no longer any violation or an ordinance violation, because I can tell you from firsthand, a lot of times everything's turned down. There's no music. There's nothing. You can't even be heard from the street.
Yeah, and what if you, I mean, sometimes they know you're coming and so they call it quits. So what if you come upon a property where somebody has in fact called in that it's a major issue for their quality of life and peace in their home, and you appear there and there are, probably over 50 students with lots of alcohol, and there's clearly underage drinking going on. And that would also be probable cause for you. So it's hard for me to understand exactly why no citations would be written in that instance, because that seems to be a significant public safety concern for the University of Pittsburgh students themselves.
If they're Pitt students, there's a lot of other colleges that we've been responding to with Point Park, CMU, and a lot of different.
I think you're deflecting there. Could you answer the underage drinking issue when it's within the jurisdiction of your distance from Pitt facilities? Why you wouldn't write a citation when you clearly observe underage drinking going on?
Well, ma'am, it's not unusual for officers to use their discretion and write a conduct referral, which is a university sanction, rather than a citation, which is further discipline. And that's the officer's discretion and their ability to do that. So they're still being sanctioned through the university.
So I think it would be helpful for us to see some reporting and data analysis about the amount of citations or conduct referrals being written on off-campus properties within the University of Pittsburgh police jurisdiction at various events on weekends and other times during the week when there are large problems and underage drinking. So can we hear from Mr. Landy about the conduct referrals, and how can we get reports from those off-campus items anonymized for personal anonymity? But it's important for the community to have an understanding of, because if the Pitt officer, the Pitt lieutenant is saying it's only at all the officer's discretion, and there's no citations or conduct referrals ever being written, that's a problem for the community in terms of these disruptions that they're dealing with on a regular basis.
Wanda, this is Officer Jeff Clum, the community program. I don't believe Lieutenant Kiefer said that there's never any conduct referrals issued. What I do want to mention, though, is to all your people, when we go to the block parties, we talk to community members, if anybody could call us in a real time. So if they call us a day later, we will complete the knock and talks at the addresses, but that's a day late. We'd like to be able to respond directly to that party during that party's occurrence when it's happening. If you're calling us a day, 24 hours, 48 hours later, yeah, we're going to do the knock and talk.
It's my understanding that residents are calling in real time, and we'd like to have an understanding of the enforcement that's going on in real time. So we'd like to know the number of citations written for off-campus disruptive behavior, and the conduct referrals, where they were located and at what time. We don't need people's names. We're not asking for that.
Yeah, so if I could jump in here, our daily crime log is posted on our website. It's the crimes from the previous day. That will also include every liquor law violation where a conduct referral is issued. That will also our daily crime log will also include arrests as well, which will include underages. So that is available to the public every single day. Also, they can request to see the crime log in person for the last 60 days. And that can be done Monday through Friday. I believe it's 8:30 to 4:30 at our station located at 3412 Forbes Avenue.
We have some hands up, so we'll let some others chime in. So we have Elena, then Kathy, then Janice. So Elena, go ahead.
I want to go back to the jurisdiction question. I live in Oak Cliff, which is the very corner of Oakland. We do have a pit property in Oak Cliff, but I want to know what is the jurisdiction? What's the, you know, miles or buildings? Thank you. That's all.
Yeah, that's a good question. So University of Pittsburgh Police jurisdiction is 500 yards with anything that University of Pittsburgh owns, leases, or rents. And I believe that's 0.827 miles, maybe. It's definitely 500 yards, but whatever 500 yards equals mileage-wise.
Yeah, so that would be, Elena, that's a really good question. So the jurisdiction extends pretty far given all of the property that the university owns throughout the neighborhood. And you're right, they own an apartment building in Oak Cliff, so their jurisdiction would definitely extend to that area. Was that all you had, Elena? Okay, we'll go on to Kathy and then we'll go to Janice.
Thank you.
I would just like to respond to some. First of all, I've been doing this for many, many, many years. And my advocacy has always been for prevention rather than punishment. These are students. Like, we want to prevent this behavior for their safety as well as for our peace. I love the walk and talk, but you know, I'm just going to give you an example from this past weekend. I called the police at 12:15. Now, at 10 o'clock, I watched more than 200 young girls walk up the street and go to a party. I know from experience that it was Girls Are Free night. And on my street now, this is, you know, it's ever changing. We have darkened houses where the parties are, and it's been the same houses for 20 years. Different students, same house. The house is dark. They have a spotter outside. The spotter tells them when the police are coming, they run or go to the next house. I know Officer Jeff can appreciate this because he's been to the party run many times. I call it the party run. But I think we need to, I would really like this group and everyone involved to focus on prevention rather than punishment and enforcing the code. And, you know, without citations, we have no recourse. And without, I think Officer Kiefer mentioned, without the complainants wanting to be seen, I'm guilty. I don't want them coming to my house because in the past, I have been the victim of retaliation. So in fact, that was one of the reasons that the Oakwatch group was initially formed, because residents weren't able to call the police for fear of retaliation because there was a lot of retaliation. So I mean, to address why we don't want the officer to come to the house during the party, that's why. But I really would like to see a focus on preventing this rather than punishing it. 200 young girls walking up the street, and it's 10 o'clock. They were a little late this week. It was 10:15. But if I can look out my window and see 200 young girls walking to a party, somebody in authority should be able to know that that's happening and prevent it rather than punish it. I called at 12:15 because by that time, those young girls who came in groups of 15 or 20 were leaving the party 2 or 3 at a time, many of whom could not walk. They needed somebody to help them down the street. They were that drunk. And I called not because of noise, but because of their own safety. And I'm sure everybody on this call knows that there was an assault on Dithridge Friday night. I don't know whether it was somebody from that party, but let's look at how can we stop this from happening rather than how we can punish it.
Yeah, Kathy, I appreciate that. That's really important and very important firsthand knowledge for people on this meeting to hear, because you are observing that firsthand in real time. And these are serious public health concerns that every single person here should be very concerned about. And the part that we want to work collaboratively with our enforcement partners to do what you're saying, Kathy, the reason we're focused on this is to identify those places and those actors who continue, right, to have these events that are often there's profit motive involved. So there are illegal sales of alcohol happening, which is also the state liquor board violation. And again, they become attractive nuisances for, if they're not enforced. So, again, our practice in Oakwatch over the years where we have had success is working collectively to identify those places and use a combination of enforcement, holding the people who are hosting that party. So the people on the lease need to be the ones who are cited for hosting that event. If it happens 3 times, it can go to the disruptive properties, and then the landlord gets involved. And that's the way we do the prevention. So this is the way we all need to work together to identify the addresses, and where we can observe. But then we do need the citations to be written. And when you see, the extent of 200 undergraduate students at one location where there's a lot of underage drinking, that's probable cause. And that's a public safety issue for our community and for those young people that we all care about. And the way to get to the prevention is by targeting the hosts who are profiting from selling the alcohol at those events and hosting those large events where this dangerous activity takes place. So we want to gather those addresses and hear specifically about, police citing the hosts and addressing with the property owner. And then we want to learn specifically, often with Oakwatch, what we do is have some case studies where we analyze specific instances. So that might be one where we look next weekend at that particular address and see what happens, and use that as a case study for how we can address that public safety issue.
Well, that's one of the reasons we document our knock and talks. So if we go back to the house a second time, we tell them this is the second time, and then we start looking at issuing citations. And so,
often I appreciate that, but often at Oakwatch, we've had a lot of concern on the part of residents, especially this time of year, every year, of not necessarily waiting weeks upon weeks for citations to be written and kind of giving them a pass and kind of giving them more. We appreciate the knock and talk program, but this activity continues and is very disruptive and very unsafe. So we'd really like a more targeted strategy of issuing citations without kind of waiting what can end up becoming a couple of months.
A lot of people are calling it real time, but I'm not seeing that all the time. These people.
Okay, so that's a message to the residents on the call tonight.
I'll put that.
Please call in real time.
Right, so I'll put that in the chat. The numbers to call so they can call the police or 911.
So we had Janice was the next hand up, and then Katie Emmert is the next person with a hand up.
Thank you all for being here. I would like to echo Kathy's articulate message and comments, and yours as well, Wanda. Addressing the citations in real time, first, numerous occasions in real time. I have made calls and spoken to campus police and city police. I have watched more than over 200 students within less than 500 feet of the University of Pittsburgh's property, as well as neighbors, long-term residents, and students that were bothered by the gatherings going on. And again, it always goes back to this, to refer to it as partying is a benign, festive event. There is absolute to be seen for people that don't work in law enforcement, probable cause. And there are people, including myself, for years I have given my name, I have stated, I have met with the officers, no citations. And there are people that contact me throughout the community are afraid to call because they're afraid of retaliation. What's really discouraging is that not only retaliation by the students, which I have been threatened by students, but they're afraid of retaliation or consider the University of Pitt police, some of them, antagonistic to them, as if the community members are the problem. There were 2 incidents where literally, and one was just a few weeks ago, where and I was told by the students, and I watched it, where my place was pointed out, and I was told that woman called. I wasn't within earshot, but the student repeated it to me and said, we know we're not going to get cited. And I hear this quite often, that they know they're not going to get cited. I mean, when there's 300, 400, and 500 students literally in a place, and we've been told throughout the years that we don't have the number of officers that we need to enforce the law, or that with 2 or 3, or we have to take a car out of service, that it just wouldn't be realistic to do that. So to send a message out that enforcement is discretionary, I mean, that's really kind of akin to profiling. You can't decide whether you're going to enforce the law or you're not going to enforce the law. Either the law is the law. And I couldn't agree more with, Kathy, that when we watch this and we see this behavior as community members, it's not only because it erodes the quality of life for everyone who lives within the community, students to long-term residents, but it's risking a catastrophe for the neighborhood. And we do care about the students. And that's the message that we want to send. It's not like, oh, there's these students again misbehaving. We look, and I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, I watched 2 students right in front of me fall off the balcony, intoxicated. And you see it and you just cringe. And you say, where are the citations? And so I don't know about the real time, because I've met with the officers in real time. And there's almost this antagonistic, the people calling, please, you're burdening us kind of thing. And you talk to a lot of people, that the walk and talks, after the fact, okay, we appreciate that. I understand community policing very well. I helped to establish and open the first community police station, right where OPDC is housed now. And it's a very valuable tool. And it has its place. But in real time, I think when we use the word discretionary, I think that becomes really problematic, because when you chase 300, 400, 500 students and you break up a party because there's so many going on, and that's all the impact squad can do is just go from party to party or gathering to gathering. I'm not going to use the word party. Okay, I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use a gathering that violates the hosting laws, for lack of a better word, one term. But I think we have to look at, parents have watched some of it when the students just move in, and they just think that there's deliberate indifference. I mean, at some point you have to, early on, students are very smart. They're monitoring. Before you hang up the phone from 911, students scatter. They're monitoring it. They tell us they're monitoring it. They tell us that. They're smart. They're very smart at what they're doing. They use social media. They're texting as they go. They use the light system, whether there's alcohol, there are certain color lights that are on and off, or whether there's other substances. So the police department, I'm sure, are aware of all these things. People in the community are, students and otherwise. But we do care about them, and I wouldn't say for a minute that the University of Pittsburgh doesn't care about their students, because I believe that they do. I think that early on, students are smart enough. If you start citing on the spot there, you are protecting the life of somebody's son or daughter. And you are also at the same time securing a better quality of life for those in the area. And that is what's been very, very frustrating for many community members. In this last 2 years is probably the first time that I've really heard even students complain. And that really was sad epitaph on what's happening.
Thanks, Janice. I really appreciate the firsthand knowledge and observations is super helpful. And
I actually, if you would let me say this, in saying this publicly, I want to say this publicly too, that I actually feel threatened by making this publicly known, because I've watched in real time a police officer point to me and say that woman called. Now, I don't know what that's about, but you should never paint a bullseye on somebody's back when you're there to protect and serve. And I think the police, from my 35 years working in community public safety, anyone that knows me knows that I am a champion and advocate of working with the police department. I praise the police department. I sing their praises. Most police officers are good and very professional people and want to help and protect and serve. And it's a very, very hard professional job, especially now in this time in our country. Get it. What's happening here in Oakland is epidemic throughout our nation. It's a larger problem, but to stick to the subject at hand here now, if we did early on, if there was a way to find a way that we can cite, students are smart, they're good, most of them are good law-abiding citizens, but you cite 20, 30, 40, you cite them, it gets around. I mean, they're texting in front of me, they're texting, out of alcohol here, police are on the way here. I mean, it's ignorant, it's pure ignorance on our part to think that students aren't smart enough when they arrange these gatherings, that they haven't thought of everything through end to end. They know the rules. They've decided not to abide by them, and there should be consequences.
Especially, I think, for the hosts, find the leaseholder at that particular gathering, as well as, write citations for a good chunk of the people who are there. But also, that's the strategy that's been deployed in the community with success in the past, that we want to see our public safety partners doing that again now. So we do want to see citations being written for hosts, because that's really the way at getting at the prevention that we're talking about and really seeing some consequences so these gatherings do not continue. I think we'll move to the next person with their hand up, and that's Katie Emmert.
Hi. Oh, I'm a student at the university, and I just thought I would share some of my thoughts and frustrations. I personally don't, like, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like the complaints and the citations are acting as like deterrents, way, like, to keep people from going to parties, but I don't really think that's an effective or productive way to solve this issue. I think mostly because students are going to drink and students are going to continue doing this, I think a part of it probably comes down to like respect for the local residents. I think that's something that needs to be improved on. I'm just not sure that like having an increase in citations and a push for citations is going to improve the relationship between like student residents and local residents. I think it'll just put more of a strain on it. So it'd be really awesome if we could like consider some alternatives or just talking about like building that relationship a little bit more. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that, you know, that's important to do as well. You know, so I think that really, again, what we're looking at in terms of strategies to address public safety, it's very complex, right? And it's very multifaceted in terms of all the different component parts to having a safe community where people get to know each other and respect each other. And enforcement has a part to play in that. Nobody would say that that would be the only strategy to deploy. I think there's lots of opportunities where residents do get to know their student neighbors and build relationships with them, and students have opportunities, you know, to get to know neighbors and to be able to build those relationships and you know, have those respectful opportunities about being in a community. The problem is that it's not always 100% of the people who are game for that, right? And so a lot of what we want to target and focus on are those, it breaks down to around 10% of, you know, the actors who see an opportunity. Often it's profit motive, you know, where there is an opportunity for money to be gained by alcohol sales that are illegal. And that's, you know, maybe 10% of the population that's causing a lot of these problems. And that's what we really want to focus on, are those really disruptive, really dangerous, large-scale events where there's a lot of illegal alcohol sales, illegal alcohol consumption at a large scale, and target those specifically. It's really that kind of 10% bad actor that we're really trying to focus on, again, from that prevention of some of these very, very dangerous situations that cause the most significant public safety challenges. And that's where we'd really like to see our enforcement partners target in on those people who are constantly seeing that opportunity. And then again, that attractive nuisance issue and other public safety issues like sexual assault and other public safety concerns. And then just, you know, you begin to see illegal drug sales coming in. If there's no enforcement happening of the illegal activity, becomes a very, very dangerous situation for everybody in the neighborhood. So it's really, you know, sort of about that balance. It's not all about enforcement. We really want people to know each other and build those relationships as well. But when the things are very dangerous and very problematic, you really need that enforcement piece of the multifaceted puzzle that we're working on here to have a safe community. Anybody else have a hand up? Or I think I'd like to come back. Oh, I see Mary, you have your hand up. So Mary, go ahead. And then I'd like to have us come back to, we had Lieutenant Kiefer say that, you know, some of the information is on the Pitt Police website on a regular basis. We can certainly work to gather some of that, compile some of that, really track some of that to kind of match up with some of the events we know to be particularly concerning, see how they match up with each other. But I'd like to understand also the conduct referrals and how those match up with some of these particular concerns in terms of data tracking that we can track and then report back out to the community. So Mary, go ahead, and then we'll go back to that data point.
Yeah, I just want to say briefly, there was a side discussion we were having in the chat that I think is valuable in terms of additional potential for catastrophe with the parties that came up to mind when Janice was talking about them. The houses in my particular neighborhood are, for the most part, designed originally to be single-family houses. They are converted to two, to three, to 4, to 5, to 6 units. Bottom line is that they were not designed to hold 200 people on a floor. There is no way in 1900, or even if it was like 2 weeks ago, that you're building a single family residence to handle a party. In addition, we have decks, again, where we have a lot of drunk kids, a lot of drunk residents out there, and an awful lot of people on probably a deck that cannot bear that load. I was just wondering, in case anyone could address that, if there are limits, or there could be limits on houses that have not been, perhaps don't have concrete floors, that there could be limits that could be imposed in the event of a party, that there's just over occupancy at that time, because we are looking at the possibility of a floor collapsing. We are looking at, there's a fire, there's a stampede, there's numerous things from a public health perspective that could give us problems. I don't know if someone could address that.
I think it's an important point. So, and definitely probable cause. So I don't know if anybody we don't have, and I'll mention that we heard from Zone 4 that they sort of got the scheduling not worked out correctly for themselves to be here tonight. So so that is a disappointment, because you know, we definitely want Zone 4 to be part of this conversation. So I don't know if any of the other enforcement partners can speak to just general concerns about, again, that public safety issue of the structure of the building itself being able, from a fire safety, structural soundness. You know, I would say that's probable cause right there to clear the building out.
One, if I can suggest, we could possibly bring our partners at the permits, license, and inspection, as well as the Fire Bureau,
We're invited.
come and discuss these issues. I know there's been an inquiry to the fire department, waiting for a response back from them, but I think PLI also needs to be involved in this discussion in relationship to the codes, what permits were issued, and occupation.
I know.
And I think often we do work with the property owners when we know there's particular concerns. And I think, you know, often that's something where we can identify a particular address, and, you know, you're saying, you know, either work with the Fire Bureau, PLI, Zone 4, to really address that in turn with the property owner themselves, to say, look, you know, this is really a potential issue for your asset, you know, that could cause a huge public safety issue or just structural issue for your property.
Well, and to make it personal too, you know, the liability that comes with, you invited 200 people to your house and they came in, and then you know, it's not just on necessarily the property owner, but it's on the person facilitating that environment too. And so we've had some discussion about, you know, this off-campus facing student office. How do we do that kind of education to Kathy's point? How do we get that in advance to say, okay, sure, no drinking, no drugs, doing that, let's not trash everything, but also here are some things that you probably haven't seen or even thought about. So that is part of the conversation.
And while we have you, Director Landy, can you talk about where we can see information about conduct referrals and how that can be reported from a data tracking perspective to, and specifically off campus? I'm not necessarily concerned about on campus.
Sure, that's a little bit difficult, but the Clery reporting, and it's not month to month, you know, I'm very much aware of that. It's not month to month. Some of the difficulty in giving you any kind of numbers in the moment is that we could get a report that comes in a week from now that would go back to, that should be added on to the numbers that we give you now. The other issue that we face in giving numbers is that that could allude to a dwelling where we know who those tenants are, which would then look at a first.
We're not asking necessarily for addresses to be published. Often in the past with Oakwatch, and again, remember, I've got years and years here of doing this work. Where we would have reports that would provide information by maybe a particular block level or a particular date that something happened, or that we could just, have some information if we are doing maybe a pilot case where we're really looking at a particular instance at a particular address. You can just simply let us know, and it's not published anywhere, but we could say, yeah, this, these citations were written and the conduct referrals, and we don't need to know people's names. But in terms of accountability for your piece of the pie, right? Again, it's multifaceted, it's very comprehensive, but that's an important piece of the overall strategy. That having some amount of accountability and data tracking is very important. So we want to be able to collect that information, and in some way, that responds to the community's concerns. Either, this week there were this many things on these streets or blocks or that kind of thing, and what the conduct violation was. Was it for hosting, for being a host of a, dangerous event? What was the actual violation? That would be helpful.
I know that I can knock it down to a certain address, but let me see what I can do. I don't like to say no to people. Instead, I would like to see what information I can disclose on a regular basis in these meetings to see how we can join in. I do read the blotters and the reports from Pitt Police and compare my docket to theirs. And if anything looks wonky, I call for clarification, or they do the same with me as well. I know that we also get information from city police sent to Pitt Police, who then file referrals with us as well. So there's a bunch of different information sources, but let me see what I can do for you, Wanda.
Okay, we'll follow up with you. Sure. I'm going to give us a 5-minute warning before we take the last comments from the community. So I would like to, keep us on time with a pretty efficient meeting this evening. I see 2 more hands, Janice and Elena. And again, to wrap up, just so again, people know our process, we do take minutes of these meetings. We will provide that on the website. And even though the meetings have moved to quarterly, that doesn't mean that the Oakwatch efforts are not continuing daily. So for the residents who are joining us, please call us and email information so that we can do this amount of tracking that we're talking about. That's really where we see results in terms of addressing. Often Oakwatch is a partnership. We're really prioritize those things and help our enforcement partners put their limited resources where we want to see them have the most impact. And so be in touch with us really by calling Liz, emailing Liz, emailing the Oakwatch email address, which Liz, could you put that stuff in the chat so people can see it? And correct me if I'm wrong, if that's not who you want them to email. But that would be helpful for us to, for residents to give the information to us. And it's not published, like that information from residents that we're hearing, it's 12:30 at night and I called on because here's what I'm seeing at this address kind of thing. That doesn't get published anywhere, but it's helpful for us to then check the police blotters, talk to the landlord, look for the student conduct issues. Like that helps us with our tracking. So between now and our next meeting, we'll try to work with folks here tonight, residents who are engaged in observing these issues, to really have a few of these case study points where we can really dig into the data and see see how we're addressing some of these particular problem events that are particularly dangerous from a public safety point of view. So we'll wrap up in a few minutes, but before we do, we'll take some last comments for the evening. So I see 2 hands right now, and that's Janice, and then we'll go to Elena.
So I have a question and a comment. There's these issues with the fire pits, the illegal fire pits. I know people have contacted 911 in real time. Firefighters have shown up, and there's concerns that they didn't cite. And they said when they would return, they were asked if there was a citation. They said, no, if they do it again, we'll cite them. They came back to the same property second time. They didn't cite them a second time. So again, citing is an issue. So one, is there a way to keep track of how many times, or to get a log of how many times for a particular incident that 911 has been summoned to a particular property? The other thing that is concerning when we talk about prevention, my concern is, and I think some other people in the community, a lot of these landlords do not abide by a lot of the fire codes. So I know years ago, and maybe Liz would know this or somebody else on tonight, years ago, we used to do a program where the firefighters would go door to door and they would offer smoke detectors and fire safety. Is there a way, particularly as the winter comes around and the heat goes on, I mean, aside from the fire, the carbon monoxide and some other issues, because that's a concern, and some of the students, you know, when we have conversations, talk about that, and that's an opportunity for, you know, the fire department, at least a city, and maybe, you know, in concert with the people at the University of Pittsburgh to help. And that's the way they can, you know, get into some of these places and look, because some of these students are obviously too victimized and being exploited by some of the places where they're renting to keep them safe, you know, from fire hazards with a number of people. And then two, on top of it, you add to the catastrophe that you don't have the fire extinguishers, you don't have the carbon monoxide detectors, smoke detectors. And years ago we had a grant and we did that. And it would be nice if we could do it again.
Wanda, I can address this. One, we've invited one of the fire marshals to attend our next meeting. So we're sorting that out. In the meantime, anyone, resident, tenant, just can contact the fire department at any time and request a visit, and they will come down and they will do a walkthrough and point out issues. If they're seeing bare wires, if they're seeing no smoke detectors or no carbon monoxide detectors, they're happy to do that. Also, currently, and I'm not sure exactly where the money came from, but smoke detectors are available for free from the fire department. You can go on their website. I'll get the form and I'll find and put it in the chat here. You can go on to them and request smoke detectors. They've got an expanded grant. I believe it came from the Red Cross, if memory serves me right. So, and that can be for tenants and residents. You don't have to be a homeowner for this. This can be yeah, you can just fill in the form and request the smoke detector. It is vitally important that we do also put an emphasis on the carbon monoxide detectors. We are dealing with older properties, and that it is a silent tragedy. It really is such a dangerous situation in so many of these older buildings that, you know, people need to be more aware of. And it would be great to have the students be more aware of that, but also residents. I mean, it's an important thing. And as I said, I'm hoping Lisa Epps will be with us later on in the year. She is a very much sought after speaker, and she's really interesting. She just gives you all sorts of information. As far as fire extinguishers, there is no mandatory law that a landlord must provide you with fire extinguishers. I would highly recommend everybody and anybody have at least one in their kitchen. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Liz.
Elena, you had your hand up, and then I think we'll have sort of final thoughts here.
Thank you. The first thing, I think landlords can specify in their lease the number of people allowed in a unit. So that's something, you know, that can be looked into. And the other thing is, you know, I've lived in Oak Cliff for 40 years. When Zone 4 did give citations the first time at a property, things greatly improved. So as a resident, I'm here to give the message that what's being done now isn't working and it isn't enough. So please consider citing the first time. Thank you.
Yeah, and Elena, I mean, maybe you could also share some of our, you know, our history of partnership with Zone 4, where we did have a policy in place with the prior commander of not, you know, not waiting to, but issuing, you know, citations, and how that was very successful from a neighborhood quality point of view.
Right. And the thoughts were, they're just going to be back in half an hour because the party's going to ramp up again. So that was part of the reasoning there. And it worked very well as a deterrent.
Yeah, so even though Zone 4 isn't here tonight, you know, if the members from, you know, so if John Tokarski, you can take that message back, and you know, our other city partners who are here, you know, we really also, you know, want to have that conversation about, you know, we don't really want this sort of grace period to happen at the beginning of the year, of the school year. It's not a good practice, and it doesn't lead to success, and it just makes everybody's work harder over time. So I appreciate everybody coming tonight and participating. And this is what we really...
Wanda, I'd just like to say one thing at the end of the meeting. We've gotten some, this is Officer Cololo. We've been getting some reports of residents have been confronting students and using profanity and threatening them and videotaping them. We just ask that the residents not do that, that they call the police. Some of the students are claiming they're being harassed by residents. They've gone forward and they place cameras on their property to catch residents that they feel are harassing them. So if the residents, if they do have any type of issue, they just please contact the police and not confront the students, because we don't want to think anything ever bad to happen to anybody. In case the student's having a bad day or has been drinking, and they might act out and hurt one of the residents. So please don't confront the students, contact the police.
We'll take a couple of last sign-offs, I think. Janice, and then again, Elena, I see those two hands, and then we'll wrap up. So a couple quick wrap-up comments to conclude the evening tonight.
There are a lot of people, there are cameras everywhere, police officers tape, students tape, residents tape. I think that comment was made at the JCCs by a COP officer. I think the background information that there are residents that have lived here a very long time that are being verbally assailed and their lives even threatened and their property. So, you know, there are cameras everywhere, and there should be no expectation of privacy in a public area, or if a student is on a resident's property. So, I mean, there is a lot happening out there, but people, you know, a lot of residents have to resign themselves to be in their homes and fear for their lives. Let me say that publicly. Fear for their lives. They are threatened by drunken students. And the fact is, you know, they are emboldened when you don't cite a student, then they are emboldened. You hear them say, there's no consequences. They're not going to cite us. And when they come on your property, when you're, I mean, myself, I can only speak to my wires being pulled off my property. And one night alone, 260 events where students walked through my property and my sensor light went on. You know, a stained glass window, 120-year-old stained glass window being broken while two students are fighting and throwing things at one another. I mean, when people feel like enforcement isn't happening, they find themselves in very desperate situation. I mean, that's really, you know, throwing, it goes back to the statement I made before where residents feel like we're the problem. We're made to feel we're the problem. Right. When you live somewhere for 50 years, when that comment was made, it was made at the JCCs, and I felt like that comment was directed toward me. I want to say that publicly, was directed toward me. Okay? I don't go out and I don't videotape. I've been a child and a teen advocate for over 30 years for a world-renowned child and teen advocacy organization. I care very much about the lives of students. And I know better after having buried a brother, a quadriplegic brother for 19 and a half years who was rendered quadriplegic by a drunk, not to argue with a drunk, whether they're a student or anyone else that's intoxicated with not just alcohol and other substances, not to argue with them. But in the last couple of years, I have been approached on my property, breached, and prior to that, literally a student's head through my window, and I have pictures, I can send it out to everybody, through my window, like here's Johnny in The Shining. I mean, when you go through that and you're traumatized year after year after year, that's minus having a 357 put in my stomach and held up at gunpoint and beaten up and coming out of the hospital. I can go through and name at least 24 events. And after a while, you become very traumatized. So, you know, the comment about students, there are a lot of students that find residents as their second mother or father or parent away from home. There are a lot of us residents that care very, very, very much for students and their welfare and want to help them and want to see them excel and remain and stay in this city. So I want to tell you that I find that comment to be very offensive. I want to go on record as saying that because the whole story and making that comment, it creates an adversarial relationship. I mean, I'm going to give you a plain example. I mean, there's on Dawson Street, there are students that say it. On Dawson Street, there's illegal fraternity operating for the last 7 or 8 years. And these are students complaining. And then these students threaten. Now, the police, 3 police were down there. I turned around, I seen them down there. And I'm on my way home. I leave Oakland. That's some of the resident strategy. We leave Oakland now to escape the chaos. That's where it is with some of us now. That's what we have to do to survive. Okay. So I'm talking to a police officer, and then she says, after like 5 or 10, the student comes out in between the police officer and myself and says, this one here squats us out. I said to the police officer, why don't you say something to him? This is when like 300 or 400 of the students were leaving that place. And she said, It's not going to go anywhere. He was behind your car listening to the whole conversation the whole time. I'm thinking to myself, so you didn't say to me, let's have this conversation elsewhere? So you didn't say to me, he's behind you, this isn't a safe place to talk, so you jeopardize my life? I mean, I take that comment, you know, is not a very nice, it's okay. There probably are people that do it, but when you're in a public area, there are people, students all the time that videotape angered or frustrated community members. I mean, we're verbally assailed. We're told to fornicate ourselves, you know, 300 times a week when there's parties going on. Our property is trashed, and we're supposed to accept that. I've held my tongue this evening in a very benevolent manner, and I had the opportunity yesterday to speak to a gentleman from the University of Pittsburgh, and he was very benevolent, and it was very cathartic to be able to talk to him. I think that the university, you know, needs to recognize that there are negative impacts of studentification on a community, and recognize that, and recognize the hurt that we feel, recognize that we fear for our lives, recognize that we have been traumatized, recognize that we feel like we're forced out of our homes, recognize that our health has declined, recognize that we feel ashamed to where we live, recognize that, because it's really important. And if I live to say anything or vent, it is that. And I'm sorry if it offends anyone. And I can give you a list of students, by the way, that call me their mother, their college mother, or their college parent, and show you a list of letters of thank you for watching my child when they're away from home. So I'm sorry. That comment.
No, don't be sorry, Janice. We all appreciate the articulation of the issues that you're dealing with and lots of other residents around you are dealing with, and they are very real. And it is very important for everybody on the call to take accountability for their part to play in the untenable situation for many residents and unsafe conditions in the neighborhood. And that's why we're here to work together to address them. But I think it is very important for people to hear that they are very real, and these concerns that we have are very real and affect the daily lives of people who live in Oakland. So this work and coming together to work around these issues and how we can affect change is, I hope, is top of mind for the officials who have responsibilities for public safety enforcement and other touch points with university students to address these issues. And they are very real and they are very serious.
Wanda, I want to thank you for that. And I want to just say it's really important to recognize, and this is my message to everyone. It doesn't matter whether you are a long-term resident or whether you're a student, you live here for a day or 100 years. We all deserve to live in peace and harmony. And isn't that what law enforcement is about? To protect and serve? It doesn't matter if it's a student or a resident. We all deserve peace, health, safety. We all deserve that.
I agree. And that is the focus. We want a safe environment for everybody, the students, the long-term residents, anybody who's here for sure.
A comment like that
We're going to wrap up this evening. And I appreciate everyone's input. Elena, did you have one last item before we conclude?
Sure, thank you. I'll be quick. I learned a long time ago not to talk to drunk people because of abuse. And I just want the officers to know one reason that we record is that we haven't always been believed about what goes on or the number of people in a house. So you really can't ask us to not record as long as it's being done in a legal manner. Thank you, Wanda, for this meeting.
Thanks everybody for attending. Thanks to everybody who shared their experiences and their firsthand knowledge of the serious concerns in the community. And we are going to continue to track the data on some of these incidences with the express goal of the prevention that Kathy talked about and affecting change to have a safer community for everyone. So stay tuned for more information that we post to the website and send out via email. Continue to contact us. Liz put her information in the chat. So we do want residents to be in touch and give us information so that we can kind of track some of this information and see where to target enforcement efforts and hold our public safety partners accountable for the kind of enforcement that, again, we all deserve to have a safe community. So thanks everybody for attending tonight, and we really appreciate all of your participation, and we'll conclude tonight's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,